Thank you for joining us today. We want to recognize a few people before we begin today's press conference, so if you'll indulge me a bit, this is becoming a bit of a habit. We've done this on a number of occasions, unfortunately, to discuss matters that are important to all our families, because I think every family in America hopes that if they've got children, at some point they can aspire to see their children go to college, do what my parents never got to do. I know there are a lot of families out there that are looking at their kids as the first to have that opportunity. And so it's an important subject that we have today. Unfortunately, as I said, it's a subject that we've had to discuss on previous occasions as well. And no one wants to go through this, but here we go. I'm going to introduce a couple of folks who will make some remarks. And I'm going to introduce a couple of other folks who are part of the Department of Justice team here in California who have done so much of the work to put us where we are today. So first I'd like to introduce our two speakers. Dalia Jimenez, a professor here at University of California at Irvine, and Mr. Seth Frotman, who is the former student loan ombudsman at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, who resigned from the CFPB because he didn't believe CFPB and this administration were following through on their obligations to actually protect students. I want to also acknowledge a couple of members of the California Department of Justice team who've been working these cases. Barney Esconderi, who is here, who is the Supervising Deputy Attorney General, and Eleanor Bloom, who is a Special Assistant Attorney General in the office. They have been working on these consumer cases, these college student loan cases for the Department of Justice, and I thank them for their effort. We're here to announce another action to protect our students, whether here in California or beyond, our students who wish and aspire to go to college. As California's Attorney General, one of my top priorities is keeping America's dream within reach for all of our families, and certainly for all those young people who want to work hard, be tenacious, juggle their responsibilities, and still figure out a way to get through college. Roughly 53% of graduates in California schools take out loans to finance their education. I should know that because I was one of them. I was the first in my family to have an opportunity to attend a 4-year university, to graduate, and to take out a lot of money in student loans from the federal government. I played by the rules. My college played by the rules. My loan servicer in those days played by the rules. And our federal government, well, it had my back. I got educated. And, importantly, I repaid my loans because of that education. That's the way it should be, fair and square. We're here in Santa Ana today, not far from the former headquarters of a predatory for-profit business known as Corinthian Colleges that did not play by the rules. Corinthian and its predatory practices were shut down by the California Department of Justice, by its tenacious investigative team, by its prosecutorial team that worked so hard to make sure that Corinthian saw justice at the end of the day for the tens of thousands of students who got defrauded and paid tens of thousands of dollars in student loans to end up with a worthless piece of paper and no ability to repay those student loans. One of the products of the work that the California Department of Justice did back then, working on shutting down Corinthian, was to pursue a better way of taking care of those defrauded students. Working with the then Obama administration, the federal government worked with us to establish what was called and is called the Borrower's Defense Rule, which allows student victims of Corinthian College and other predatory for-profit institutions to have their federal loans discharged so they can reclaim part of that American dream they're working so hard to pursue. Unfortunately, with Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos at the helm at the U.S. Department of Education, we have seen her turn back the clock and we have seen her turn her back on our students, delaying and denying debt relief, leaving thousands of students and former students saddled with a worthless diploma and a mountain of debt. So the state of California has taken Secretary DeVos to court. In July of 2017, California and 18 other states filed a suit against the Department of Education for unlawfully delaying the implementation of the Borrower's Defense Rule. We also brought our own lawsuit here in California against Secretary DeVos in December of 2017 to challenge her department's failure to process tens of thousands of Corinthian students' borrowers' defense claims. Today, we lend our support to a separate but related lawsuit, Calvillo Manriquez versus DeVos. The suit that we're supporting at this stage was brought by students who were defrauded by these colleges. These students secured a preliminary injunction that stopped Secretary DeVos from providing only partial relief on their claims for fraud. But the Department of Education is now appealing that court's order in favor of the students. The Department of Education essentially is attempting to continue its illegal practice. So today, the state of California is leading a coalition of 8 states in standing up for these students. We're filing a friend of the court brief in the Ninth Circuit, challenging Secretary DeVos's failure to provide relief to these students. I want to thank the attorneys general from Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, and Washington for their support. I also applaud the work of the 2 organizations standing up for students in this case: Housing and Economic Rights Advocates and the Harvard Legal Services Center. We've worked with both organizations in the past with our work protecting students. This is not California's first action to protect students who have been victimized by predatory for-profit colleges, and it won't be our last. We sued Navient, the nation's largest student loan servicer, for systematically and illegally failing borrowers at every stage of the repayment process. We're currently litigating against a so-called university, Ashford University, and its parent company, Bridgeport Education, over illegal marketing and debt collection practices against students. By the way, I should also add that many of Bridgeport Education's executives are now government officials in that very Department of Education that Secretary DeVos runs. Whether it's a for-profit college or the federal government, no one gets to cheat our students and get away with it. We won't stop fighting to protect America's college students, their families, and that American dream. And with that, I'd now like to turn it over to Professor Jimenez from the UC Irvine School of Law. Professor.
Thank you. Thank you, Attorney General Becerra. Good afternoon. My name is Dalia Jimenez, and I'm a law professor at the University of California, Irvine, where I teach consumer law and business courses. I'm going to be an academic for a minute and talk about government regulation. Regulation gets a bad rap. To hear President Trump tell it, if we only had less regulation, all of our economic worries would go away. This is wrong on so many levels. It's not because government regulation is perfect. It isn't. And in fact, most of my job is criticizing it. But without rules setting a level playing field and without serious enforcement of those rules, we all suffer. Regulation ensures that we have safe food to eat, safe water to drink, and air to breathe, and safe consumer products. Arguments that the, quote, market will take care of it, or that, quote, companies have an incentive to treat their customers right, or savings from regulatory burdens will be passed on to consumers, ignore both reality and history. In the consumer finance context, we have abundant evidence that misleading consumers is a lucrative deal. It seems like every day we learn about some new scam or some new way in which a company is abusing consumers. Individuals are not in a position to protect themselves. That's why we have government and government agencies. Regulations protect consumers, but they do more than that. They protect the market. They help to ensure that the companies who are trying to play by the rules and trying to do things right are not disadvantaged by competing against companies who are not doing so. We need good rules, and we need good enforcement of those rules. Unfortunately, this administration does not seem interested in doing either of those things. The Trump administration and Secretary DeVos's Department of Education are failing to protect student loan borrowers from predatory companies who are trying to make a quick buck on the back of students. The department's own research has shown that students who enroll in for-profit schools pay more, borrow more, and default more than students in traditional nonprofit educational institutions. Those students and the taxpayer deserve our protection. But instead of protecting the federal student aid program and students, Secretary DeVos wants to overturn the gainful employment rule. Now, the gist of this rule is that it denies federal student funds to schools who cannot turn out graduates who can earn a living. It was drafted in response to collapses of Corinthian colleges, ITT, and others because of the abundant evidence that these schools had engaged in deceptive and misrepresented practices. In other words, the gainful employment rule is designed to weed out schools that have no business calling themselves schools. Those schools do not deserve federal dollars. Instead of this rule, Secretary DeVos proposes to replace it with one that simply requires schools to list information in their website, information that most of them already disclose. Now, you've heard just about the borrowed defense rule. Well, instead of protecting students from predatory schools, Secretary DeVos wants to destroy the borrowed defense rule. As you've heard today, the goal is to ensure that students who are lied to by their school get the relief they are owed, and that those schools are held responsible for their behavior. Instead of this accountability for schools who have defrauded their students, the department wants to hamstring the ability of students to obtain relief. The department proposes to set short limits on how long students have to make claims against predatory schools and to give schools the ability to contract their claims into mandatory arbitration where they can sweep complaints under the rug. Instead of celebrating public service and implementing federal statutes, the department wants to thwart the goals of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program by unconscionably delaying or refusing to forgive the loans of thousands of borrowers. And in its latest budget proposal, the Trump administration wants to actually end the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Student loan borrowers deserve government officials that work for them. State attorneys generals like Attorney General Becerra are stepping in to fill the gap left by federal agencies like the Department of Education. This is good news for student borrowers and taxpayers. They deserve regulation that puts their interests above those of large corporations. Thank you. Now I'm going to introduce Seth Frotman, my former colleague at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the former student loan ombudsman there.
Thank you very much, Dahlia, and thank you, General Becerra. It is my privilege to join you today as California continues to fight for the millions of borrowers drowning under the weight of historic student debt. California is showing the nation how states can be critical players in the fight for borrowers' rights. Until last month, I had the privilege of serving as the top student loan official at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I worked with leaders at all levels of government to crack down on the abuses plaguing 44 million Americans who struggle under the weight of more than $1.5 trillion of student debt. I heard directly from tens of thousands of student loan borrowers across all 50 states, including thousands of borrowers right here in California. Their complaints highlight the rampant illegal practices and inexcusable policy failures that have placed the American dream out of reach for far too many. Across America, more than 11 million borrowers are behind on their student loans. For those borrowers and the countless others who are making their payments but barely getting by, these are kitchen table financial issues that affect every aspect of their lives. On everything from buying a home to choosing a career, from starting a family to saving for retirement, student debt casts a shadow that many Americans cannot escape. As the burden of student debt continues to grow, its shadow also spreads unevenly across our communities. We know that people of color borrow more and more often than their white peers. And helping to drive this divide are predatory for-profit colleges that aggressively and deliberately target these communities, peddling the false promise of economic opportunity. The abuses of the largest for-profit colleges stretch back decades. First, these companies lied to students to get them in the door by promising a fast track to a brighter future. Then companies loaded these students up with debts they knew could never be repaid. with the ultimate goal of driving large bonuses to executives and profits to shareholders. And when the abuses committed by the largest for-profit colleges finally caught up with them, these companies sought protection from the bankruptcy system, a system that provides a critical second chance that is denied to the very borrowers that were preyed upon by these same companies. As Washington raced to catch up to this widespread fraud and the extraordinary damage it did to American families, the Obama administration took steps to offer these borrowers a fresh start. It built a path for borrowers to escape the fraudulently incurred debt that underpin this illegal business model. But even before the Trump administration set its foot in the door, it had its sights set on gutting these protections. And in the early days of this administration, Secretary DeVos stonewalled thousands of borrowers who were already pursuing these protections, leaving them, quote, partially buried under fraudulent debt. Then she slammed the door on thousands of future borrowers that should have been eligible to seek relief. And now she is proposing to effectively shut down any path to debt relief for defrauded borrowers, while also denying millions more the right to demand justice through the courts. These actions are nothing short of brazen and illegal. Fortunately, these egregious efforts have been met with strong opposition from state attorneys general, including General Becerra, and by organizations like the Housing and Economic Rights Advocates and the Harvard Project on Predatory Student Lending. These organizations and Attorney General Becerra are the champions for justice that millions of borrowers so desperately need. And today's announcement is another sign that this fight will continue, that these rollbacks will not go unchallenged. But it is clear that we must do more. We must create a different and better future for student loan borrowers, one in which we do not overlook the predatory actors that prey on their vulnerabilities, one in which we do not treat student loan borrowers as second-class citizens simply because the word student precedes the word loan, one in which we do not accept that Betsy DeVos alone controls the financial futures of more than 40 million Americans. In important ways, this future begins here in California. This state has the chance to deliver on that promise made to the 4 million borrowers living here and to paint a starkly different picture than the one offered 3,000 miles away. And California is beginning to do just that. In suing Navient, General Becerra has fought back against abuses that harm borrowers living in communities all across California, practicing hurting every type of borrower with every type of loan in every stage of repayment. And the California legislature has made sure that the Department of Business Oversight has the authority it needs to go after the companies that are harming the nearly 4 million people in this state who owe student debt. But we must not forget that Betsy DeVos and the rest of the Trump administration will use every tool at their disposal to stymie these efforts. Tens of millions of student loan borrowers now have a federal government that is not only walking away from the fight, but is arming the other side. This is why California's work to protect student loan borrowers is so important. And this is why I'm proud to be here as General Becerra and the state of California shows us how state government can and must be a fierce advocate for borrowers' rights, one that stands up to special interests and fights on behalf of families with student debt. This is how, in the face of an increasingly hostile federal government, we start to make progress. This is how we drive lasting reform across the student loan system and protect the millions of student loan borrowers too often left behind. But this is just the beginning. This is going to be a long, hard fight, and I am proud to stand with Attorney General Becerra and with California every step of the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To Professor Jimenez and Mr. Frothman, we say thank you very much for your words. We have some charts that give you a sense of the magnitude of this issue, the number of students that are waiting for the relief that they thought they had. These are all young men and women who may still need to finish college, may no longer be in college because they can't afford it, but are still facing a mountain of debt that was supposed to be relieved. And here you get a sense of what the federal government under the Trump administration and Secretary DeVos has been doing. And you can see what happens when you have young Americans who want to have that chance at the dream confront a government that is unwilling to have their backs. Thank God some of us got through before we started to see this, because we could easily be right here with these folks. Any questions? We'll take them now.